A mother's sacrifice. Margaret's life had never been easy. She lost her husband, Robert, when Daniel was only 6 years old. A factory accident took him away in a single afternoon, leaving Margaret with a broken heart and a small boy who still waited by the door for his father to return. From that day on, Margaret became both mother and father. She worked as a cleaner in rich homes, scrubbing floors until her fingers cracked and bled. She skipped meals so Daniel could eat well. She wore the same worn shoes for years so she could buy him new ones. At night, when Daniel slept, Margaret cried quietly into her pillow so he would never hear her pain. She made a promise to herself: my son will never feel the emptiness I feel, and she kept that promise. Daniel grew into a kind, intelligent young man. He studied hard. He respected his mother. He loved her, or at least Margaret believed he did. The day everything changed, Daniel met Emily Carter at his workplace. Emily was beautiful, confident, and came from a comfortable family. She spoke softly, dressed elegantly, and knew how to make Daniel feel important. Margaret noticed the change in her son even before he told her. He smiled more at his phone. He came home late. He spoke less at dinner. When Daniel finally said, "Mom, I want you to meet someone," Margaret's heart trembled, not with fear but with hope. She cleaned the house like it was a festival day. She cooked her best food. She wore her cleanest dress when Emily walked in. Margaret welcomed her with open arms and a nervous smile. But Emily's eyes moved around the small house, the old furniture, the simple life, and something hardened in her gaze. She smiled politely, but her heart never opened. A marriage, a distance. Daniel married Emily within a year. Margaret cried that day too, but they were tears of happiness. She believed she was gaining a daughter. She was wrong. After the marriage, everything changed. Emily didn't like the old house. She didn't like the smell of home-cooked food. She didn't like Margaret's quiet presence. "She interferes too much," Emily would whisper to Daniel. "She's old-fashioned. She makes me uncomfortable." At first, Daniel defended his mother. But love can be loud and guilt is often silent. Slowly, Daniel stopped speaking up. The house that grew cold. Emily convinced Daniel to move to a new apartment. "It's better for us," she said, "for our privacy." Daniel told his mother gently, "Mom, it's not far. I'll visit." Margaret nodded, smiling through the pain. "Of course, my son. Be happy." The day Daniel left, Margaret stood in the doorway holding a small bag of homemade food. Daniel hugged her quickly. Emily waited by the car. Margaret watched them drive away, her heart whispering a fear she didn't dare speak, and the house became colder than ever before. A mother's tears. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. Daniel's visits became rare. His calls became short. Sometimes, there were no calls at all. Margaret's health began to fail. Her knees hurt, her vision blurred, but she never complained. Every night she prayed, "God, keep my son happy," even if that happiness no longer included her. One rainy evening, Margaret slipped in the kitchen and fell hard on the floor. Pain shot through her body. Her voice trembled as she called Daniel's number again and again. No answer. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, tears rolling into her ears, not from pain but from loneliness. Meanwhile, his wife's comfort. That same evening, Daniel sat beside Emily on a soft couch in their warm apartment. The lights were dim. The room smelled of expensive perfume. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. "You work too hard," she said softly. "You deserve comfort." Daniel smiled. His phone vibrated silently on the table. He didn't notice, and somewhere, in a cold house with faded blue walls, a mother whispered her son's name into the darkness. The rain did not stop that night. It fell without mercy, beating against the roof of Margaret Wilson's old house, slipping through the tiny cracks in the walls, as if even the sky had decided to cry with her. Margaret lay on the cold kitchen floor, unable to move. Her leg throbbed with pain, but it was not the pain that frightened her. It was the silence. The house that once echoed with her son's laughter now answered her cries with nothing. With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone again. "Daniel." She pressed his name, her breath shaking as the phone rang. Once, twice, then silence. Voicemail. Margaret closed her eyes. "It's okay," she whispered to herself, forcing a weak smile. "He must be busy. My son will call back." But deep inside her heart, a quiet fear began to grow. Memories on the cold floor as she lay there, unable to stand. Memories wrapped around her like a cruel blanket. She remembered the nights she stayed awake when Daniel had a fever. Placing a cool cloth on his forehead, she remembered walking miles in the rain to buy his school books. She remembered skipping meals, telling him, "I already ate, my child." Margaret had never asked for anything in return. Money, not comfort, only love. Tears slid down her wrinkled cheeks, soaking into the floor. "Daniel," she whispered again, her voice barely louder than the rain. "I just need to hear your voice." A warm home, a cold heart miles away. Daniel sat at the dining table with Emily. The room was warm, filled with soft music and the smell of freshly cooked food. Emily laughed as she showed him something on her phone. "You should really stop worrying so much about your mother," she said casually. "She's strong. She always manages." Daniel nodded, though something inside him felt uneasy. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Mom, 5 missed calls." He hesitated. Emily noticed immediately. Is she calling again? Emily asked, her smile fading. It's always something with her. Can't we have one peaceful evening? Daniel's hand slowly moved away from the phone. I'll call her later, he said quietly. Later never came. The night that broke her hours passed. The pain in Margaret's leg grew unbearable. Her throat felt dry. Her body shivered. She tried to crawl toward the chair, but her strength failed her. Finally, exhaustion won. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, her eyes open, her heart whispering a truth she didn't want to accept. Her son was no longer coming. Outside, the rain softened, but inside the house, something broke forever by morning. Margaret was barely conscious. A neighbor, Mrs. Helen, noticed the lights still on and knocked repeatedly. When there was no answer, she forced the door open. The sight froze her heart. Margaret, she cried, too late to answer at the hospital. Doctors worked quickly. Margaret had fractured her leg and suffered severe dehydration. She's very weak, the doctor said gently. She needs family support. Mrs. Helen nodded and immediately called Daniel. This time he answered. Daniel, Mrs. Helen said urgently. Your mother is in the hospital. She fell last night. She kept calling you. Daniel felt the world spin. What? He whispered. She called me. Yes, she replied softly. Many times, Daniel looked at his phone. 5 missed calls from the woman who gave him life. The first crack of guilt. Daniel rushed to the hospital alone. Emily had refused to come. I have worked, she said coldly, and honestly hospitals make me uncomfortable. Daniel didn't argue. As he stood beside Margaret's bed, seeing her fragile body, the tubes, the pale face, it hit him like a storm. She looked smaller than he remembered. Weaker, her eyes slowly opened when she saw him. A faint smile touched her lips. You came, she whispered. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, gripping her hand. I should have answered. Margaret smiled gently, the way only a mother can. It's okay, my child, she said softly. You must be busy. I don't want to trouble you. Those words hurt more than anger ever could. A mother still protecting her son. Margaret didn't complain. She didn't ask why he didn't come. She didn't mention the pain, the fear, the loneliness. Instead, she asked, Is Emily well? Are you eating properly? Are you happy? Daniel couldn't answer. For the first time in his life he realized something terrifying. He had chosen comfort over conscience, silence over duty, and while his wife slept peacefully in a warm home, his mother had cried alone on a cold floor. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady sound of the heart monitor. Daniel sat beside his mother, holding her fragile hand as if it might disappear if he let go. Margaret's skin felt cold, thinner than paper, yet her grip, though weak, was still filled with the same love it had always held. She slept most of the time, and every time her eyes opened, she smiled at him. That smile broke Daniel's heart again and again. Son's silent realization. Daniel watched the rise and fall of his mother's chest and remembered something that made his throat tighten. She used to sit like this when he was sick as a child, all night, without sleep, without rest. And now, he had ignored her calls, not because he hated her, not because he didn't love her, but because it was easier not to choose. Daniel finally understood a painful truth. Neglect doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from silence. Emily's words that evening. Daniel returned home. Emily was sitting comfortably on the couch, scrolling through her phone. So, she asked without looking up, how is she now? She's weak, Daniel replied. She was alone all night. Emily, she could have died. Emily sighed, placing her phone aside. Daniel, you're overreacting, she said calmly. She's old. These things happen. Something snapped inside him. She called me, he said, his voice shaking. 5 times. I didn't answer. Emily crossed her arms. And what do you want me to say? She replied. You can't put your whole life on pause for her. Her words were soft, but they cut deeper than any knife. The unspoken choice that night. Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing 2 voices inside his head. One voice said, You have a wife now. Your responsibility is here, the other whispered. She gave you everything before you had anything. At dawn, he made a decision that would change everything. Bringing his mother home. Margaret was discharged after several days. She needed care, rest, and someone by her side. Daniel stood at the hospital door, holding her bag. I'll take you home, Mom, he said gently. Margaret looked confused. To my house? She asked softly. You don't need to trouble yourself. I'll manage. Daniel swallowed hard. No, he said firmly. To my home. With me. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. You want me there? She whispered. Daniel nodded. For once, he said quietly, I want to do the right thing. A cold welcome. Emily's smile disappeared the moment she saw Margaret step inside their apartment. She stood still, silent. Later that night, she confronted Daniel. You didn't ask me, she said sharply. You just decided. She's my mother, Daniel replied. She needs me. Emily laughed bitterly. And what about me? She asked. My comfort, my space, my life. Daniel looked at her and realized something painful. This was never about space. It was about priority. A mother who felt unwanted. Margaret noticed everything, the cold looks, the forced smiles, The silence at dinner. She tried to stay invisible. She cleaned quietly. She spoke softly. She apologized even when she did nothing wrong. One evening, Daniel overheard her whispering into her pillow. "I don't want to be a burden," she cried. "I should have stayed alone." Those words crushed him. The wife's ultimatum a week later. Emily stood in front of Daniel with a face hardened by anger. "It's either me or her," she said coldly. "I didn't marry you to take care of an old woman." Daniel felt the room spin. He remembered his mother's hands feeding him, holding him, saving him, and he looked at his wife, comfortable, unshaken, untouched by sacrifice. For the first time, Daniel spoke without fear. "She's not an old woman," he said firmly. "She's my mother." Emily stared at him. "You're choosing her?" she asked. Daniel's voice broke, but his words were clear. "I'm choosing my conscience." A storm before the end. Emily packed her bags that night. Margaret tried to stop her, tears in her eyes. "It's my fault," she said softly. "Please don't leave because of me." Emily didn't even look back. Daniel held his mother as she cried, not for herself, but for him. "My son," Margaret whispered, "I never wanted to come between you and your happiness." Daniel pressed his forehead against hers. "You are my first home," he said, and I forgot that. The apartment felt different after Emily left, not quieter, but heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel tried to return to routine. He went to work. He cooked meals. He cleaned the house. But nothing felt normal, because nothing was normal anymore. Margaret moved slowly, leaning on her walking stick, apologizing at every step. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said again and again. "I ruined your home." Daniel would stop whatever he was doing and hold her hands gently. "No, Mom," he said, his eyes full of pain. "I ruined you." A mother's guilt. Margaret could not sleep at night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her son breathe from the other room. Every sound reminded her that he had given up his comfort for her. And that thought broke her heart. One night, Daniel heard soft sobbing. He rushed to her room and found her sitting on the bed, clutching an old photograph. Daniel as a child, smiling, his arms around her neck. "I never wanted this life for you," she whispered through tears. "You were meant to be happy, not divided." Daniel knelt in front of her. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking, "I was happy once, when you were my world. I just forgot." Margaret smiled weakly. "A mother's job," she said softly, "is to be forgotten. As long as her child lives." Well, those words stayed with Daniel. The silent decline. Margaret's health slowly worsened. She tried to hide it, the shortness of breath, the trembling hands, the pain. She swallowed with a smile, but a mother's body can only carry so much. One afternoon, Daniel returned from work to find her sitting by the window, staring outside. "Mom," he called. She turned and smiled faintly. "I was just waiting," she said. "For what?" Daniel asked gently. "For nothing," she replied. "Waiting is just something mothers learn." That night, Margaret asked Daniel to sit beside her. "Tell me about your day," she said. Daniel talked for a long time about work, about small things, about memories he had forgotten to share. Margaret listened quietly, her eyes shining. When he finished, she placed her hand on his. "Daniel," she said softly, "promise me something." "Anything," he replied. "Don't let guilt ruin your life," she whispered. "Love deeply. Forgive easily. And when you remember me, don't cry." Tears streamed down Daniel's face. "I can't promise that," he said. Margaret smiled. "I knew you'd say that." That night, while Daniel slept in the chair beside her bed, Margaret closed her eyes peacefully. She did not wake again. A son left behind. The morning light revealed the truth Daniel was not ready to face. Doctors spoke gently. Nurses lowered their eyes. Daniel stood still, too still. The woman who waited her entire life had stopped waiting. At the funeral, Daniel stood alone, holding the photograph she loved so much. No wife by his side, no comfort in his arms, only regret. Weeks later, Daniel found Emily's message on his phone. "I hope you're well," it read. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he looked around the empty apartment. The comfort he once chose was gone. The mother he ignored was gone, but her tears, they would stay with him forever. Daniel placed his phone down and whispered into the silence, "I'm here now, Mom." But for the first time in his life, she did not answer. Time moved on. It always does. But for Daniel Wilson, time didn't heal, it reminded. Every morning he woke up expecting to hear the soft sound of his mother moving in the kitchen. Every evening he caught himself turning toward the window, imagining her sitting there, waiting. Then reality returned. She was gone, and the silence she left behind was louder than any scream. Home without a heart. Daniel kept the apartment exactly the way it was. Margaret's shawl still hung behind the door. Her cup still sat on the shelf. Her photograph rested beside his bed. He couldn't bring himself to move anything because removing those things felt like losing her all over again at night. Daniel often sat alone and spoke to her photograph. "I should have come sooner," he whispered. "I should have answered." The photograph, frozen in a gentle smile, said nothing. Regret has a voice. Daniel began visiting old age homes on weekends. He didn't tell anyone why. He sat with lonely mothers, listened to their stories, brought them food, medicine, warmth. Sometimes, he just held their hands. One elderly woman once said to him, "You sit like a son who is trying to apologize." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Maybe I am," he replied softly. The letter he never sent one evening, while cleaning. Daniel found an old envelope tucked inside Margaret's cupboard that had his name written on it. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside was a letter, written in her weak, uneven handwriting. "My dear Daniel, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to wait for you. Please don't blame yourself. A mother never keeps accounts. I was happy just knowing you existed. If I ever cried, it was not because you failed me, it was because I missed you. Live well, my son. That is all I ever wanted." Daniel collapsed to the floor, clutching the letter to his chest. For the first time, he cried, not quietly, not silently, but with a broken voice that carried years of regret. A son who finally understood. Daniel never remarried, not because he hated love, but because he finally understood it. He learned that love is not comfort, it is sacrifice, it is presence, it is answering the call, especially when it's inconvenient. Every year, on his mother's death anniversary, Daniel cooked her favorite meal and donated it to the poor. And every year, he whispered the same words, "I'm listening now, Mom." Final message to the world: some people are blessings that wait quietly. They don't demand, they don't complain, they just love, and when they're gone, we realize too late the comfort we chose was temporary, but the love we ignored was forever.